Okay, so in this Money's More Nikki, this is the third thing I wanted to talk about as it relates to reasons why you might not be reaching your goals. So we talked about overestimation, we talked about overcommitment, and now I want to talk about overstimulation. And this is a thing where, we are in this culture because of social media and our just insane level of access to information that we are getting a bunch of noise and we get a bunch of messaging. And I mean, you're listening to me, so you're getting another perspective. But there's a lot that is coming through. And the reality is, a lot of people are just in a state of being overstimulated because there is a lack of quiet time, a lack of stillness, a lack of just being able to be present in a moment without going on to the next thing and the next thing. And so part of it is this kind of grind culture, and there has to be a mindset reset and understand that you can be ambitious, you can work hard, and you can also strategically rest. Like these things are not, they don't have to be at odds. And I'm going to do, I think, a separate video more in detail about that. But I think that, one of the things that we have to get away from, and I think it contributes to being overstimulated, is this idea that multitasking, is the truth. And it's really not. The reality is that multitasking is not really a thing. All it is that you are switching your brain from left to right, back and forth, hopping from one thing to another. And low-key, you're like stressing yourself out and creating a level of anxiety because your mind is just jumping around. And that is not the highest and best use of your mind. Contrast that to when you kind of actually lock in on something and you knock that thing out. Like you are able to kind of go in and really execute at a higher level when you're able to focus on that thing. And the reason I say that this is part of contributing to kind of stress and anxiety and things like that is because there's so many incompletes that are hovering over your head because you're hopping around for the sake of multitasking. There's so many open loops. Like when you are a perpetual multitasker, you end up just jumping around. And so now there's like 50 things that are all in progress, but none of them are actually done. And it feels like there's just like anvil or boulder that's over your head versus saying, I'm going to do these three things today. And if I do these three things, this is a win. And then if you want to pull some things over later because you get stuff done, fine. But it's like, these are three things I'm going to get done. And that's part of how you prioritize. Yes, there are things that come up that are emergencies, but the reason I'm not being dismissive of that, but I also feel like the reality is like we use that so much that we don't actually know what an emergency is anymore. Poor planning is not the same as an emergency. And so sometimes people fail to plan and it is now an emergency because there is an external deadline. Like if we don't get this filing into the courthouse, this case gets thrown out. Others, it's, yeah, I wanted it, but I didn't send it to you. And so now it's going to be delayed by 3 days because there's other things in the pipeline. And because everything that, you get in and every request you treat as an emergency, you are hopping around and keeping all these things up. Anyways, I'm going to get off my soapbox about it, but I'm just saying I think this leads to part of why people feel like so overwhelmed because you're trying to do all of these things at once. You're trying to juggle all of these things at once instead of just recognizing that there are limitations to how much you can do at once. And this idea that we're all like trying to prove that I can do more and more and more and more and more is literally keeping you in a state of being overstimulated and overwhelmed. Like it really is. Like who said trying to do 50 million things was like the badge of honor? Like we got to reset the mindset. And again, I am not advocating for not working hard. I am team hard worker, but I'm also big about strategic, you know, efforts and making sure it's impactful. And I also rest because the reality is when I rest, I actually go faster. This concept of sometimes you have to slow down to speed up. And I know that sounds contradictory to people, but when you're always perpetually doing stuff in a state of exhaustion, you are never going to be as productive or as effective as you otherwise could be. And so you're trying to do everything. And then you get to a point where it just feels overwhelming. So then you end up in a state of procrastination, or you're doing everything, but you're not doing it up to your standard. And so now you're performing poorly. And so it's just like we have to understand that like not there's a way to be like accomplishing your goals without burning yourself out and you trying to keep up with a pace and appearances that are no longer sustainable in your current season is the problem. And so that's really the thread across this whole thing is like you really have to be setting your goals based on what makes sense for you now. And you have to stop leveraging outdated benchmarks because there may have been a season where you could stay up till 4 a.m. and be back up at 7 and you just need a Red Bull and you can keep it pushing. But now you may need to be in that bed at 10 in order to get up at 7 or whatever that looks like. And we just have to start being honest about that, and figuring out if I want to grind, if I want to get these things done, how do I do that in a way that is sustainable and doesn't burn me out? And that's the question that you have to be asking this year. It's not about you not being ambitious. It's not about you not shooting for the stars, but it is about how do you get there in a way that you actually can thrive. Because most of y'all are crossing the finish line, hands, knees. It's like that the marathon runner who has to be carried, and it's just a mess. And at some point, like crossing the finish line, but in that state is not a victory. Is not a victory. So I want us to think more deeply about this, and I'm excited to journey with you this year and just kind of dig in. And I'll talk to you next week.